A man spends 40 years building things that outlast him: barns, porches, additions on other people's houses, so that his own family never has to sleep under a leaking roof. He assumes they understand why his back is bent the way it is, why his hearing favors the left ear after decades of nail guns, why he still wakes at 5 even now. He assumes the calluses and the sunburned neck and the missing tip of his left ring finger are proof he was there, holding the whole structure up while everyone else slept warm inside it. But comfort has a way of erasing the memory of who poured the foundation. Somewhere along the way, gratitude turns into expectation, and expectation turns into embarrassment. Welcome back, everybody. I appreciate you spending part of your day with me. Before I get into this one, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. And if you believe an honest day's labor deserves respect instead of a seat in the back row, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps more than you know. To explain how I ended up standing outside the Riverbend Country Club in a rented tuxedo that didn't fit right, watching my own son's wedding through a window instead of walking through the front door, you need to understand Roger. Roger was my ex-wife's husband of 11 years, though by the way he carried himself around my son, you'd have thought he'd raised the boy from a bassinet. Roger sold commercial insurance out of a glass office building in Scottsdale, wore loafers with no socks even in October, and had a laugh that carried across a room like he wanted everyone to notice he was having a good time. His hands were soft and pink, the kind of hands that had never held anything heavier than a putter or a fountain pen. My name is Walter Combs. I'm 63 years old, and I've spent every one of my working years as a carpenter and general contractor here in the high desert outside Prescott, Arizona. If you passed me at the hardware store in my work boots and my faded canvas jacket, you probably wouldn't look twice. I've got a permanent stoop in my shoulders from 4 decades of framing walls, a hitch in my right knee from a fall off a second-story joist back in 1998, and hands so weathered and thick-knuckled that shaking mine feels like shaking a fence post. I'm not a smooth-talking man, and I never tried to be one. My mistake, if you want to call it that, was believing that raising a boy right and showing up for every single one of his baseball games and paying for his community college out of my own pocket would mean something permanent. I never asked my son Derek to thank me for it. I just figured he understood. Derek's mother, Sandra, and I split up when he was 7. It wasn't ugly, not at first. We just wanted different things. She wanted the country club life, and I wanted to keep building houses with my own 2 hands instead of selling somebody else's. She married Roger 4 years later, and from that point on, every school function, every Christmas, every graduation had 2 fathers standing in the same room, one in a sport coat that cost more than my truck, and one in the only suit he owned. I never made Derek choose. I want that on the record. I paid my child support 2 weeks early, every single month, for 11 straight years. Even the year's business was slow, and I had to skip my own truck payment to do it. When Derek wanted to play travel baseball, I picked up extra remodel jobs on weekends to cover it. When he decided he wanted to go into finance instead of the trades, I didn't argue, even though some small part of me had hoped he'd want to learn the business I'd spent my life building. I paid for 2 years at the community college out of my savings so he could transfer into a 4-year program debt-free. I never once brought it up at dinner. I figured a man doesn't need to announce what he's already done. Derek got engaged last spring to a young woman named Brooke, whose family owned 3 car dealerships across the Phoenix Valley. The wedding was set for the 2nd Saturday in November at Riverbend, a country club with a ballroom that looked like something out of a magazine, all crystal chandeliers and marble floors. For nearly a year, all I heard about from Derek were vendor calls, tasting menus, and seating charts. I didn't complain. I was proud of him, genuinely proud, watching him build a life that looked so different from the one I'd built. When the final invoices started coming in, I offered to help the way I always had. I wrote a check for $26,000 to cover the reception hall, the catering deposit, and half of the open bar. I didn't ask for my name printed anywhere. I didn't ask for a toast. I just wanted to walk into that ballroom, shake my son's hand, and watch him marry the woman he loved. The call came on a Wednesday evening in late October, 6 days before the wedding. I was in my garage workshop, sanding down a walnut jewelry box I'd been building as a wedding gift for Brooke. Sawdust settled into the deep lines of my palms the way it always did. My phone buzzed on the workbench. It was Derek. "Hey, Dad," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans out of habit, though the dust never fully came off anymore. "Everything squared away with the caterer?" There was a pause, longer than it should have been. I could hear music in the background, something soft, and the clink of what sounded like wine glasses. "Dad," Derek said. His voice had a careful flatness to it, the kind people use when they've rehearsed something they don't want to say out loud. "I wanted to talk to you about the rehearsal dinner photos." Brooke's family hired a photographer who shot for 2 different bridal magazines. Her mom wants a whole spread submitted for a feature. "That's great, son," I said. "Sounds like a big deal, right? Well," he continued, and I could hear him choosing each word like he was walking across ice. "They're doing this thing where they photograph the toast, the father-son handshake before the ceremony. Real close-up, black and white. Real formal. Brooke's mom thinks it would look better, more polished, if Roger did the toast and stood up front with me during the processional." Something tightened low in my chest, though I couldn't yet name why. "Roger," I said slowly, "it's not about you not being there, Dad. You'll still be at the wedding, obviously. It's just Brooke's family has a certain image for this, and Roger's already got the tux. He does this kind of thing at his job all the time. Public speaking, and your hands, Dad. Look, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but the close-up shots, they're going to show everything, the scarring, your finger, and it doesn't match what they're going for visually." I stood there in my garage, sawdust on my palms, looking down at my right hand, at the flattened stub where the tip of my ring finger used to be before a table saw took it in 2009. 3 months after Derek started high school, the same year I worked through the injury without missing a single one of his games. "What about my hands, Derek?" I said quietly. "They're just really rough, Dad," he said. And now his voice had that same practiced calm his mother used to use when she'd already decided something before she called. "It's not a big deal. You'll still be there. Front row, you'll still get to see everything. It's just the walk-in and the toast, that's all." Brooke's mom already talked to the photographer about it. I didn't raise my voice. I've never been a man who raises his voice. Real hurt doesn't make you loud. It makes you very quiet and very still. "You're telling me my hands aren't fit to be photographed at my own son's wedding," I said, just to hear how it sounded out loud. "Don't make it weird, Dad," Derek sighed, and I heard him move somewhere quieter, away from the music. "It's one night. I need this to go smoothly with Brooke's family. You know how her mom is." He didn't wait for me to answer. He said he had to get back to the tasting, told me he loved me, and hung up before I could say another word. I sat on the stool in my workshop for a long while, the jewelry box half finished in front of me, the smell of walnut dust still in the air. My knees ached from a day spent on a job site, pouring a new foundation slab for a young couple's first home. I thought about all the nights I'd stood on a ladder in the dark finishing a deck so a family could move in on schedule. All the mornings I'd driven 2 hours before sunrise because a client needed a repair before the weekend. I thought about how none of that had ever once shown up on my hands as anything other than proof. My old foreman, a wiry, sun-cured man named Ed Kowalski who'd worked beside me on and off for 30 years, called me that same night to ask about a lumber delivery for Monday. I told him what Derek had said. Ed didn't say much at first. He just went quiet on the other end of the line. "A man's hands are the only resume that never lies, Walt," Ed finally said, his voice low and rough as gravel. "If his own boy can't read it, that's a shame on the reading, not the hands." That was Ed's way. No wasted sympathy, just something solid to hold on to. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee going cold in front of me, and I pulled up the wedding contracts on my laptop. Back in the spring, when I'd first written that check to Riverbend, the events coordinator, a precise, no-nonsense woman named Diane Pruitt, had explained that because I was covering the deposit and the bulk of the balance directly, the account and all vendor authorizations were tied to my name as the primary payer. Any changes to vendor access, room configuration, or service upgrades required my written sign-off, right up until 72 hours before the event. I called Diane first thing Thursday morning. "Good morning, Mr. Combs," she said. "We've got you down for final walkthrough Friday afternoon. Everything's on track." "Diane," I said, "I need to go over the account authorization one more time." "Of course," she said. "You're the primary account holder on the full balance, 26,000 and change, so you retain administrative control over vendor add-ons, floral upgrades, and bar service tiers up until the 72-hour mark. Is there an issue?" "No issue," I said. "Just a change I want to make." I didn't call Derek to argue. I didn't call Roger to confront him. I didn't drive over to Sandra's house and make a scene in her driveway. That's not who I've ever been, and it's not who I intended to become over a phone call, no matter how much it stung. I simply made sure that everyone was going to get precisely what they'd asked for. On Friday afternoon, the day before the wedding, I drove out to Riverbend in my old F-250, work boots still dusty from the job site that morning. The club sat at the end of a long drive lined with palm trees, all sandstone and glass, and a fountain out front that probably cost more than my house. I walked into the administrative office and met with Diane, carrying a manila folder under my arm. "Mr. Combs," she said, shaking my hand without hesitation, cracked knuckles and all. "I'm making a change to tomorrow's arrangements," I said. "My son has informed me that his stepfather, Roger Whitfield, will be standing in as the father figure for the processional and giving the toast in my place. Since Mr. Very C. Whitfield is stepping into that public role, I believe it's only appropriate that he take on the financial role that goes with it. I'd like to transfer the outstanding service authorizations, the top-tier bar package, the floral upgrade, and the late service catering fee into his name, effective immediately, as I understand I'm entitled to do as primary account holder until tomorrow at 2. Diane looked down at the paperwork, then back up at me. It took her all of 5 seconds to understand exactly what I was proposing. "Mr. Combs," she said carefully, "if you withdraw authorization on those add-ons, the outstanding balance, roughly $9,400, including the premium liquor package and the photography suite rental fee, will need to be settled by whoever is listed as responsible on the updated form before those services can proceed tomorrow." "That'll be Roger Whitfield," I said. I handed her the notarized amendment I'd had drawn up that morning, along with a cashier's check covering only the base reception hall and the dinner service I'd originally agreed to, exactly what I'd promised Derek from the start. My commitment stands as it was. Everything beyond that, the top-shelf bar, the extra floral work, the professional photography package for the magazine spread, falls to whoever's standing at the front of that aisle representing the family tomorrow. Diane's expression stayed neutral, professional, but there was a flicker of understanding behind her eyes. "The paperwork's in order," she said. "Will you need a seat reserved near the front?" "No," I said. "Back row is fine. Table 18, if there's one open." Saturday morning came in bright and cold, the kind of clear autumn sky you only get in the high desert. I put on the rented tuxedo, the only one I could get on short notice, and it sat a little tight across my shoulders. I scrubbed my hands 3 times with the shop soap I kept under the sink, but the dust and the scars and the stub of that missing fingertip weren't going anywhere. They were 40 years of my life, and no soap on this earth was going to change that. I arrived at Riverbend a little after 4. Luxury cars were already lined up. The circular drive, women in silk and men in tailored suits, stepping out under the covered entrance. I walked in through a side door and found table 18, tucked near the kitchen pass-through, half hidden behind a large floral arrangement. Perfect. At 4:45, I spotted Roger in the lobby, immaculate in a black tux, his hair combed back, laughing with 2 of Brooke's uncles. He looked every bit the proud father figure, smooth pink hands adjusting his cufflinks. Then I watched Diane step out of the office and intercept him, a clipboard in her hand with a heavy invoice clipped to it. I couldn't hear the words from where I sat, but I watched the whole thing unfold through the glass like a silent film. Roger's easy smile faded as he read the paper. Confusion first, then something tighter, paler. He started gesturing, pointing back toward the ballroom, his soft hands cutting through the air. Diane stood still, arms folded, her voice calm and even. Roger pulled out his phone. 10 seconds later, mine buzzed in my lap. Roger Whitfield. The screen read. I let it ring out. 2 minutes after that, it buzzed again. Derek. Hey, son, I said, keeping my voice level. Dad, what is going on? His voice was tight, hushed, clearly stepped away into some side hallway. Roger's freaking out down here. They're saying he owes over $9,000, or they're cutting the bar and canceling the photography package. I'm sitting at table 18, Derek, I said. Just like you asked me to be, out of the shots. Dad, this isn't funny. Roger doesn't have 9 grand sitting around for this. His business had a rough quarter. You need to fix this. The way I understood it, I said, my voice even and unhurried. The man standing at the front of the aisle today represents the family paying for the day. I covered exactly what I agreed to cover back in the spring, the room and the dinner. Everything past that belongs to whoever's walking you in and giving that toast. Seemed only fair. My hands weren't good enough for the photographs, Derek. So I figured they shouldn't be signing for the champagne either. There was a long silence on the line, the kind that has weight to it. You embarrassed him in front of Brooks' whole family, Derek said finally, his voice cracking somewhere between anger and panic. No, I said. I gave $26,000 to make sure you had the wedding you wanted. What happens with the extra $9,000 is between Roger and whoever he needs to call. I'm hanging up now, son. I believe the music's about to start. Outside in the hallway, I watched Roger pull 3 different cards from his wallet, sweat beginning to darken the collar of his shirt as Diane processed one after another. At 5:15, the doors to the garden opened and the ceremony began. Derek stood at the altar in a suit that fit him better than mine fit me, and Roger walked in at Sandra's side, trying to hold on to his composure, though his jaw was set tight the entire way down. When the photographer stepped forward for the formal handshake photo between father and groom, right there under the lights set up for that magazine spread, I watched Roger's hand tremble, just slightly, red creeping up along his collar. Not from cold, from the 10 minutes he'd just spent maxing out 2 different lines of credit in a country club lobby. I sat quietly at table 18 through the ceremony, my hands resting on my knees, scarred and still. The reception went on, and it became clear within the first hour that Roger's payment had covered only the bare minimum, standard bar, no top shelf, and the photography package had been trimmed down to just the basic package instead of the full magazine spread. Brooks' mother had been so excited about. I watched Brooks' mother's face tighten every time a guest complained about the limited bar selection, watched her eyes cut toward Roger more than once across the room. Around 8:30, while the band played and the dance floor filled, Brooks' mother stepped away and disappeared toward the office, no doubt trying to sort out the photography package. But it was Derek who came looking for me, walking the long way around the room, past the head table, past the string lights, until he stood in front of table 18. His tie was loosened, his face flushed. "Are you happy about this?" he asked. I looked up at him and took a slow sip of water. "I'm not happy, and I'm not angry, son. I'm just here, same as I said I'd be. You humiliated Roger in front of Brooks' entire family," he said. "Do you understand that? Roger humiliated himself, trying to take credit for a role he never actually built anything toward." I said quietly. "And you embarrassed yourself the moment you decided 40 years of a father's work could be judged by what his hands look like in a photograph." Derek's jaw tightened, but for just a second, something in his face softened, and I saw the boy who used to sit on an overturned bucket in my garage, handing me nails while I worked, never once bothered by the dust or the noise. Then it passed, and he straightened up again. "Roger's furious," he said. "He had to put $9,000 on 2 different cards tonight." "Roger's got soft hands," I said, looking down at my own resting on the white tablecloth. "I imagine he'll find a smooth, easy way to earn that back." Derek looked at my hands then, really looked, maybe for the first time in years. I watched his eyes move over the flattened stub where my fingertip used to be, over the pale scar along my palm from a roofing accident back in 2015, over the permanent grain of dust worked so deep into the skin that it would never fully wash out. He didn't say anything else, He turned and walked back toward the lights, toward the band, toward the man in the expensive tuxedo, who was currently arguing quietly with the bartender about the drink selection. I didn't stay for the cake. I didn't stay for the last dance. A little after 9, I stood up, buttoned my rented jacket as best it would button, and walked out through the side entrance into the cool desert night air. If you've ever given everything you had to someone only to be told it wasn't good enough to be seen, I want to hear about it. So go ahead and leave a comment down below. And if this is the kind of story that means something to you, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. It helps keep these stories going. I climbed into my truck and sat there a moment before starting the engine, looking down at my hands on the steering wheel in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. They were rough. They were scarred. They ached most nights now when the temperature dropped, and they would keep aching for the rest of my life. But they belonged to a man who had never once asked anybody else to carry what was his to carry, and who never would. I put the truck in gear, pulled out past the fountain and the palm trees, and drove home under a sky full of stars, alone, but not for 1 second sorry.